This Family Life News podcast is made possible by the support of listeners like you.
It's the Noon Report from Family Life, bringing a Christian worldview to what's happening in New York, Pennsylvania, across the country, and around the world. Weather with Kevin Williams, plus special features and reports with the Family Life News team. Now, here's what's happening.
Good afternoon. Welcome to the broadcast. ICE is coming, and not the immigration enforcement kind. A messy mix of wintry weather will create difficult travel conditions tomorrow night and Thursday. Rain, freezing rain, ice, sleet, and snow, all in the offering.
The ice is the most dangerous, obviously. You can't travel on the roads. The power lines get coated with ice. We could also get a burst of snow here in the Northeast. So kind of complex, but the bottom line is dangerous travel for millions of folks starting tomorrow.
Fox News meteorologist Janice Dean will have more on the coming storm with Kevin Williams a little later. President Trump is hosting his first foreign head of state at the White House today, his first since taking office 2 weeks ago. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is in town to discuss Mideast peace now that a ceasefire deal is holding in Gaza. The world leaders will also discuss the ongoing threat posed by Iran. More from correspondent Linda Gradstein.
Netanyahu is in Washington amid challenges from within his government and his ongoing trial on corruption charges. Hardliners in Israel want him to return to fighting Hamas in Gaza once the first stage of the ceasefire ends, while President Trump has said he wants to end all wars.
A trade war with China is looming large. The world's two largest economies are facing off in a fiscal tit-for-tat after the Trump administration imposed a 10% tax on Chinese imports overnight. China responded with retaliatory tariffs of their own. They kick in next Monday.
The question that economists look at is not whether prices will rise because of tariffs in a trade war, but when and how much.
NBC's Christine Roman says the trade war could raise the cost of antibiotics and cancer drugs made in China. Business analyst David Patrick.
President Trump, at the end of the day, he's a strategist. He's thinking 5, 10, 15 moves ahead, and he knows he has the leverage card. He's going to be pushing his weight around, and he ought to be, because it's about time somebody on America negotiated on our behalf in ways where we're not being taken advantage of.
Pennsylvania Congressman Glenn Thompson spoke to Family Life News earlier today.
This is not a trade war. This is a drug war. Soft diplomacy has not worked, and it's using tariffs as a tool, and it's for the greater good. This really is all about shutting down those borders.
Not a trade war, a drug war, says the congressman. President Trump last night paused for 1 month the tariffs on Mexico and Canada after they both agreed to his demands. Both countries have promised to do more to stem the flow of migrants and drugs across their borders. One of Trump's cabinet picks had his nomination voted out of committee today in the U.S. Senate. That vote was 14-13 in favor of Robert Kennedy Jr. He's been tapped to serve as Secretary of Health and Human Services, a floor vote in the U.S. Senate expected next week. The president of El Salvador is offering to house deportees and convicted criminals from the U.S. after striking a deal yesterday with Secretary of State Marco Rubio.
MS-13, Tren de Aragua, whatever it may be, he has offered his jails so we can send him in and he will put him in his jails. And he's also offered to do the same for dangerous criminals currently in custody and serving their sentences in the United States, even if they're U.S. citizens or legal residents.
Rubio says El Salvador is an important ally of the U.S., even though it is the smallest country in Central America. The world's richest man, Elon Musk, is making his presence known in D.C. as point man for the president's Department of Government Efficiency. Musk shut down yesterday the government's chief foreign aid group, USAID. Now Musk is threatening even more fiscal belt tightening.
The president called Elon Musk
very talented guy from the standpoint of management and costs.
He says he's digging deep into the government, in particular
waste, fraud, and abuse.
And he's given him the job of letting people go he thinks are no good. But
Elon can't do and won't do anything without our approval.
Stacey Lynn, the White House.
Still to come on the Noon Report for a Tuesday, things are getting real when it comes to Real ID, the Shapiro budget in Harrisburg, and New York's AG is all in on the trans agenda.
Good afternoon. I'm Kevin Williams, looking at a brisk afternoon with clouds, sun, some lake flakes, and the complete forecast coming up in 10 minutes.
All right, Kevin, we'll look for you then. Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro pitched his third budget address to a joint session of the General Assembly today in Harrisburg. He wants to legalize recreational marijuana, tax popular gaming machines, and send more money to the state's poorest schools. The governor's also proposed more aid for rural hospitals and a boost in pay for workers who care for the elderly and disabled. Lawmakers have until June 30th to strike a deal with Shapiro on the state budget. New York's Attorney General Tish James is advising hospitals to ignore a new Trump-era executive order against sex change operations on kids. The AG says if hospitals refuse to perform chemical or surgical castrations or deny puberty blockers, they'd be violating New York state law. Anti-trans activist Riley Gaines.
When you have an attorney general tell her entire state to not comply with federal law, she is no longer acting as an attorney general. She is an activist at that point. But this just shows me that November 5th taught the Democratic Party nothing. The majority of Americans do not support the gender transitioning of minors.
President Trump has forbid federal funding for so-called gender-affirming care on children. New York's governors signed a new law that shields abortion pill providers from criminal prosecution.
Governor Hochul saying doctors should be able to send abortion medication across state lines to take the life of a baby without being caught.
Providing abortion care by telehealth or mail can be a life-saving intervention for people living in states where their most basic right to control their own bodies is denied.
The move came after a grand jury in Louisiana, where mail-order abortion is banned, indicted a New York doctor for shipping the drug to a pregnant minor. Sarah Harnish, Family Life News.
A new Siena College poll has mixed results for Governor Hochul. It shows even though the governor is underwater with voters, many of her proposals are still popular. That's about the only good news for Governor Hochul, though. Her overall favorability rating remains below 40%, and just 3 in 10 New Yorkers would vote for her to be reelected. There's a boil water order in effect today for the villages of Fredonia and Warsaw in western New York. The towns of Warsaw and Pomfret also covered by the water emergency. A blown pipe at a water treatment plant and a water main break are the reasons for those boil water orders. Police in Rochester, New York have launched a new weapon to crack down on crime after a string of recent car break-ins. Cops are using license plate readers to combat the rash of vandalized vehicles.
Broken glass, it's not just an inconvenience. If you're struggling to get to work, the stolen Hyundais and Kias, frequently those are people that have jobs that are trying to get to work and now can't. People that can't afford to replace some of the damage that's being done to these vehicles.
Rochester Police Captain Greg Bellows says the license plate readers automatically generate an officer response anytime there's a car break-in. A Guatemalan migrant living legally in Dunkirk, New York, is facing life in prison for human trafficking. Police say this guy, 33-year-old Augusto Mateo Francisco, imprisoned migrant workers and repeatedly assaulted a 16-year-old girl he brought to western New York from Guatemala. Meantime, New York Congressman Nick Langworthy wants to turn the Niagara Falls Air Reserve Station into an ICE deportation center. He wants the Defense Department to let ICE use that base to house dangerous migrants. Starting May 7th, Real ID or an enhanced driver's license will be required to fly domestically in these United States. You'll also need the upgrade to enter federal buildings or military bases.
Are you ready? And do you understand what Real ID is? Are you Real ID compliant?
Mark Schroeder's commissioner of the New York State Department of Motor Vehicles.
Take out your license, and if you don't have a flag or a star on it, you are not Real ID compliant.
Now, if you do show up on May 7th without it, it is a very good possibility that you will miss your flight.
TSA spokeswoman Lisa Farbstein.
TSA is currently working on a plan to somehow phase in the Real ID enforcement with the understanding that enforcement will actually begin on May 7th.
Monroe County, New York Clerk Jamie Romeo says if you're not compliant, you will need to go to the DMV's website to find out what documents you need, and then you'll need to make an in-person appointment with the DMV.
There are so many people who like doing transactions now online, but this is one that you can't. So you need to come into a DMV office.
DMV officials say it'll take about 7 to 10 days to receive your real ID after you've had your in-person appointment. A Pennsylvania politician wants to abolish property taxes. Republican Representative Russ Diamond's proposed letting voters decide the fate of property taxes through a constitutional amendment. If Diamond has his way, property taxes would be no more effective July 1st, 2030. Voter turnout in the 2024 election was the highest it's been in more than 30 years in Pennsylvania. More than 77% of registered voters took part. That's the highest percentage of any election since 1988. Over 7 million Pennsylvanians cast ballots, with President Trump defeating Kamala Harris by 120,000 votes.
The border and economic anxiety were two things that Democrats knew were a problem 2 years ago, and they did nothing to address either of them.
Political strategist Mike Manzo has the following advice for Democrats moving forward.
Don't overreact. Democrats have a tendency to overreact and want to burn the house down. Step back. Hone your message a bit.
Democratic consultant Johnny Hill says Democrats could learn a thing or two from Donald Trump.
He knows how to talk to folks, right? He is a good messenger, no matter what you think of the message.
For the record, Kamala Harris got 45,000 fewer votes in Pennsylvania's largest city, Philadelphia, than Joe Biden did 4 years ago. New York's congressional Republicans are up in arms over reports that state Democrats are considering legislative maneuvering to delay a special election. This is the race to replace Representative Elise Stefanik, who's been nominated to serve in the Trump administration. New York's 6 GOP members of Congress have signaled that they will take this fight to the U.S. Justice Department if need be, if state Democrats run afoul of federal law. By law, Governor Hochul must announce a special election within 10 days of that congressional seat being vacated. Democrats, however, may delay the vote until June, when the state holds its primary election. 5 years after COVID, health experts are taking stock of the lessons learned from the pandemic.
If we're faced with another pandemic, there may be different challenges that we'll have to be exposed to, but I think there were a lot of things that were learned as a result of this pandemic.
Epidemiologist Dr. Mary Jo Trepka telling Family Life,
we're living with it. It's not going away, but it's not causing the devastating effects that it caused several years ago.
Over 1.2 million people have died from COVID in the U.S. Worldwide, the pandemic has claimed more than 7 million lives. An Amish farmer in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, has just been convicted of neglect for the death of his 3-year-old daughter 3 years ago. She was killed after being left unattended on a horse-drawn cart. The girl fell from that cart, which was pulling a large tobacco wagon. She and her 4-year-old brother were the only ones on it. The conviction was one of 4 fatal accidents that happened on Amish farms in Lancaster County that year. A new legislative proposal in Pennsylvania seeks to return the opening day of deer season to its previous date.
From 1982 to 2018, hunting license sales in Pennsylvania dropped by almost 530,000, which became a factor in the Game Commission's decision to move up the opening day for the antlered deer rifle season from the Monday after Thanksgiving to the Saturday of that weekend. Officials say the hope was to keep more of the younger generation interested in hunting. Though studies have shown that 60% of hunters favor the Saturday opening, State Representative Brian Smith is sponsoring House Bill 70, which he describes as a return to tradition to switch back to a Monday opener. A similar legislative proposal to return the deer season opener to the post-Thanksgiving Monday has also been introduced in the state Senate. Brian Query, Family Life News.
Thank you, Brian. Sports next. It's the 2-minute drill on Family Life.
Good
afternoon, I'm Randy Snavely. Bob, entering the fourth quarter, the Knicks were trailing by 11 points, but that's when Jalen Brunson kicked it into gear. Brunson scored 17 points in the fourth quarter on his way to a 42-point night, and New York came back to beat the Houston Rockets 124-118. Brunson also dished out 10 helpers to his teammates. Both Karl Anthony Towns and Mikal Bridges had 22 points. Josh Hart chipped in with 19. For Brunson, it was his 18th 40-point game with the Knicks, and that moved him past Carmelo Anthony for third place on the franchise list. And it was his 12th game with at least 30 points and 10 assists since coming to New York, putting him past Hall of Famer Richie Guerin for the most in franchise history. In other action, the Wizards down the Hornets 121-114. Atlanta got past Detroit 132-130. The Kings also won by a bucket 116-114 over Minnesota. The Thunder no trouble with the Bucks 125-96. The Spurs fell to the Grizzlies 128-109. Denver knocked off New Orleans 125-113. The Pacers eked out a 112-111 victory against the Jazz. Golden State took a 5-point win, 104-99 over Orlando. And in overtime, the Trailblazers beat the Suns 121-119. Just one game on the ice, Ottawa, a 5-2 winner over Nashville. Well, the hype for Super Bowl 59 is underway. Most are talking about the Chiefs and their chances at a three-peat, but the Eagles are coming in confident they will win their second Lombardi Trophy. We'll just have to wait until Sunday to find out. That is a look at sports.
Yes, we will. Thank you, Randy. Still to come on the Noon Report, trade war with China, Bibi at the White House, and the power of sports ministry.
Welcome to Breakpoint, a daily look at an ever-changing culture through the lens of unchanging truth. The Colson Center. I'm John Stonestreet. A few months ago on the Breakpoint podcast, I spoke with David Bahnsen, the founder and chief investment officer of the Bahnsen Group, and also a highly sought-after commentator on market trends and economics on all kinds of national media. Our conversation then was occasioned by a 1,000-point dip in the stock market, a correction that led to panicked headlines about the prospects of the economy and our collective financial futures. Calmly and carefully, Bahnsen described what had led to this particular sell-off, a sell-off that did not even crack the top 100 in history. The dip, he explained, had far more to do with international markets than with American electoral politics or other hypotheticals that were irresponsibly thrown around at the time. Christians, he noted, should not be so vulnerable to panic like everyone else. Our worldview demands that we think and we live differently in every area of life, this one included. How the sovereignty and faithfulness of God reframes a true understanding of economics and financial stewardship are things not often talked about, at least not nearly enough by Christians. Too often we're shaped by fear, market volatilities, and over-reliance on politics, and especially a secular view of work and money. In his book, Full-Time: Work and the Meaning of Life, David Bahnsen argues that work is best understood by the truth that God has revealed to us about himself, about the world we live in, and especially about who we are in his image. In fact, Bahnsen believes that Christians working as Christians will be an essential part of our witness in this cultural moment. I asked David whether he thinks this is a way that Christians have to be, quote unquote, weird in this cultural moment. And his answer was clear.
Yes, I very much do. I have agreed with it, believed it, advocated for such for a long time. That it is, to me, the lowest hanging fruit for those of us, and this is, of course, at the very heart of what the Colson Center has always been about. For those of us who believe in cultural influence, the kingdom of God being a matter of all of these endeavors that God has created, that he cares about, that the marketplace to me is the most fertile soil for Christians to do the work of the kingdom, to stand out. There are areas in which it can be weird because, for one thing, these days it might be weird to tell the truth. It may be weird to be faithful to your spouse. There's all kinds of things in which certain virtues, character traits that are unique to Christians represent a positive differentiation. But I also would say that if we are doing our jobs right, this is the essence of the book, We will not be weird. We will not stand out. We will not move the needle in the culture only because we bring the most honesty to work, although I hope we do. We will also need to bring the most technique, the most productivity, the most innovation, the most hustle, grit. I think basically being the top performers in our work is a moral calling.
David Bahnsen's book, Full-Time Work and the Meaning of Life, is a must read. It will help you recover a Christian understanding of work, ambition, money, retirement, and many other things. Get a copy of Full-Time Work and the Meaning of Life this month with a gift of any amount to the Colson Center. Just visit colsoncenter.org/February. That's colsoncenter.org/February to give. Before I go today, I want to give a special thank you to Ronald and Sharon of Lakewood, Colorado. Thanks for being a monthly partner of the Colson Center. You help make this episode of Breakpoint possible. For the Colson Center, I'm John Stonestreet with Breakpoint.
Thank you, John. Outside next, Kevin. Here is your family life weather forecast for this afternoon. Mixed sun and clouds, lake flurries and snow showers that'll linger into tonight in the lake belts. Temperatures nearly steady, dropping into the teens tonight. Tomorrow, some sun but clouding up with a flurry, high temps 20s. Snow, sleet, freezing rain will arrive later tomorrow night, continue into Thursday, then taper to a couple of rain showers and some drizzle. High temperatures Thursday in the mid-30s to the middle 40s. Kevin Williams, thank you very much at the Weather Center. This is the Noon Report. I'm your host, Bob Price, and here's what's happening Tuesday, the 4th of February. Israel's head of state meeting today at the White House with President Trump. The BBC's Giles Gibson has a preview.
The Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is set to be the first foreign leader to meet President Trump at the White House since his inauguration. As he boarded his flight to the U.S., he said their talks will focus on securing the release of Israeli hostages, as well as Iran.
Trump and Netanyahu will host a joint news conference after 5 o'clock today. The U.S. and China, the world's two largest economies, now embroiled in a trade war. The communist regime threatening retaliatory tariffs on us after the Trump administration imposed a 10% tax on China. Correspondent Naomi Rocco.
China's retaliatory tariffs don't go into effect until next week, offering some time to negotiate. But President Trump is now warning that he could bump the tariffs up even higher if China doesn't work to stop the flow of opioids into the U.S.
President Trump last night paused for 1 month the tariffs on Mexico and Canada after they agreed to his demands. The smallest country in Central America is offering to house violent criminals here in the States. That overture was made after a visit to El Salvador yesterday by Secretary of State Marco Rubio.
An incredibly unusual offer made yesterday by the president of El Salvador to Secretary Rubio, who is visiting that country. The Salvadoran president offering to accept not just migrants from El Salvador, but also from any other country, or even to house American citizens convicted of crimes in Salvadoran jails in exchange for a fee paid by the U.S.
Correspondent Garrett Hake. Secretary of State Rubio says the now shuttered humanitarian relief agency, USAID, will be absorbed by his agency, the State Department.
This is not about ending the programs that USAID does per se. There are things that it does that are good, and there are things that it does that we have strong questions about. It's about the way it operates as an entity.
USAID doles out more than $40 billion a year in humanitarian aid to 130 countries worldwide. It was shut down yesterday by Elon Musk, the Doge administrator.
We don't have a fourth branch of government called Elon Musk, and that's going to become real clear.
Maryland Democrat Jamie Raskin protesting outside the headquarters of USAID yesterday. Aviation safety remains in the spotlight in the wake of those deadly plane crashes in Washington and Philadelphia. The Army Corps of Engineers is leading the effort to pull the wreckage from the D.C. crash out of the Potomac River. We get more from aviation expert Chris Van Cleve.
It was a haunting sight Monday as pieces of the American Airlines regional jet were pulled out of the Potomac River just 5 days after the deadliest U.S. air crash in more than 2 decades.
Chris Van Cleve in Washington. This is the Noon Report on Family Life.
Welcome back to another edition of Hometown Heroes on Family Life. I'm Mark Webster. This week's guest is Doug Reifenberg of Victory Sports, a Western New York ministry advancing the gospel by distributing sports gear to youths, a role he seems to have been born to play. Here's part one.
Yeah, my dad, his name was Dick Reifenberg. My dad was an All-American at the University of Michigan football player. He won the national championship with Michigan back in 1947 and 48. After he got done playing there, he played for the Detroit Lions. So I was rooting for the Lions this year too. Played there for one season, and then he blew out his knee and ended up coming to Buffalo. He was born and raised in Michigan, ended up coming to Buffalo and became a sportscaster. So my dad was one of the main guys on TV and radio for probably 30 years back in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, and covered the Buffalo Braves, the Buffalo Bills, the Buffalo Bisons, UB football. That was my dad. My mom actually was always involved in sports too. She was a phys ed instructor at Buff State, and she actually coached the cheerleading team there. And that cheerleading team actually became the first Buffalo Gills cheerleading team. So my mom actually launched the Buffalo Gills back in, I think that was in the early 60s.
Wow.
And they were one of the first NFL cheerleading teams.
You've carried on the family trade.
Yeah, I've tried. It's in our blood. The blue and maize is in our blood, and sports is in our blood. I played every sport growing up. I then went on to the University of Buffalo and played football for 2 years. And then I've been kind of in the sports industry in different businesses and sales for most of my career.
How did that all morph into Victory Sports?
Like 12 years ago, I launched our sports ministry program over at Eastern Hills Wesleyan Church. And we started running a floor hockey program through Upward. We ran flag football camps and leagues. And that just really opened my eyes to, number one, the power of sports to minister to kids. And also it opened my eyes a lot to the different levels of need that were out there. And so we had a lot of different families coming in and utilizing our programs, and some had the resources and had the equipment and many didn't. The gear started churning at that point. How could I help these kids and these families get the equipment that they needed in order to play the sports, where then they could receive that positive impact that comes from sports and the coaching and the mentoring that comes along with it? And how could I also turn that kind of into a ministry where we can also share the love of Jesus with people? And that's kind of the original concept of Victory Sports Global Outreach. We ended up launching officially in August of 2017.
I've had the privilege of doing some mission trips down to the Dominican Republic, where baseball is really big. And I saw firsthand, and no doubt you've seen it even more, the way that sports can be such a venue to greater things.
For sure. One of our missions is to help missionaries, to help churches that are going on missions trips. We've probably partnered with at least 12 different churches over the last few years. Some of our equipment has been sent to probably 18 different countries. It's funny, I coached youth sports and middle school and high school sports for years myself. And I always would talk to the parents and I'd let them know, like, there's certain things that are maybe going on in your kids' lives where they're never going to listen to you as a parent sometimes. But if a coach says something to them, their ears perk up and they listen to them. And so it might be something that a parent has been telling a kid for years, like, you got to eat your fruits and vegetables and your protein. And until a coach tells a kid to do it, it doesn't really sink in properly. And the same thing can be said about the gospel. Sometimes kids are raised in a church or raised in a home where mom and dad might be talking about Jesus and the gospel and church, but it never really sinks in. And then all of a sudden they see a professional athlete or a collegiate athlete praising God and giving God glory, or maybe it's one of their coaches that shares the love of Jesus to them, and it impacts them in a different way because they're going to listen to them as this role model. And that's where sports just becomes so powerful.
We've seen a lot of that lately, both in, say, pro football, and especially the college football playoffs. Win or lose, we had a lot of athletes out there who are putting Christ first.
For sure. I mean, Jaden Daniels has been a great example of that. I think God was definitely with him this year to take him as far as they did as a rookie quarterback. I think the Bills, there's plenty of believers. I mean, every NFL team, every college team has that group of believers. But even Ohio State, listen, I'm a Michigan guy, so this is hard for me to say. But Ohio State was honestly one of those colleges that was probably the most forward with their outreach. I mean, right when camp started and college started back in the fall, Ohio State did this big revival on campus. And a lot of their top athletes were there, and they had music and worship, and they praised Jesus. And they had tons of college athletes or college students come to accept Jesus through that. I find it very difficult to give Ohio State any praise But when you're praising the Lord and lifting him up and helping to lead people to him, I can't do anything but give them props for that.
Yeah, absolutely. The scripture tells us that the fields are ripe, and maybe that includes football fields and baseball fields.
It's definitely ripe. Kids are open to listening to coaches and fellow athletes and leaders on teams. That's where it's always so important for a team to have a really strong Christian captain or leader that's outspoken and isn't ashamed to share the love of Jesus with their teammates.
That's Doug Reifenberg with the Western New York ministry Victory Sports. In part 2 next week, stories from the field where they've brought the love of Christ through sports. Please join us again next time as we search for your home, your town, your hero. It's Hometown Heroes on Family Life.
All right, great work as always. Thank you, Mark. Hometown Heroes comes your way Tuesdays during the Noon Report. Now, you can subscribe, listen to, and share this feature along with all our original podcasts at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or FamilyLife.org.
Good afternoon. Here is your Family Life regional weather forecast. Brisk cold weather conditions are expected to be with us this afternoon through tonight with some flurries and snow showers. The expectation is that activity will fade away from the lakes and we'll have tranquil weather tomorrow. The next weather maker, though, looks broader, stronger, juicier, and it looks to produce one of those mixed events. Snow, sleet, freezing rain, and rain for our area later Wednesday night and Thursday. For this afternoon, mixed sun and clouds, lake flurries and snow showers that'll linger into tonight in the lake belts. Temperatures nearly steady, dropping into the teens tonight. Tomorrow, some sun, but clouding up with a flurry, high temps 20s. Snow, sleet, freezing rain will arrive later tomorrow night, continuing to Thursday, then taper to a couple of rain showers and some drizzle. High temperatures Thursday in the mid-30s to the middle 40s.
All right, Kevin, thank you. Finally at noon, a musical instrument made in the year 1714 could become the most expensive ever sold.
The Stradivarius violin is hitting the auction block in New York Friday. Pre-sale estimate as much as $18 million. Sotheby's Marie Claudia Jimenez.
Stradivarius made just over 1,000 violins. Not all of them are playable. They're in different states and conditions. This one is in exceptional condition.
Jimenez tells CBS's Deborah Rodriguez.
And it was made during the golden period by Antonio Stradivari. So this is the peak of his output. This is the best violin of this era.
For $18 million, it better be. Again, that violin will be auctioned off Friday. And that's our world. The world we live in, Tuesday, February 4th. I'm Bob Price. Family Life News.
You've been listening to the Noon Report, heard weekdays on Family Life. Thank you for listening.
Thank you for listening to this Family Life News podcast. If you've been encouraged by what you've heard, please share it with others and click the subscribe button to automatically receive future episodes. Family Life is a listener-supported ministry. Podcasts like this are made possible by your financial partnership. Find out more at familylife.org.